Imagine, imagine a chief trauma surgeon.
Okay.
Like a guy who spends 14 hours a day, maybe 6 days a week, just piecing together shattered skulls and, snapped spines from horrible highway collisions.
Right, someone who sees the absolute worst of it.
Exactly. He knows the exact physics of what happens when a human head hits asphalt at 60 miles an hour. He knows those grim statistics better than literally anyone alive. But his shift ends.
Mm-hmm.
He clocks out, walks to the hospital parking lot, throws his leg over this incredibly heavy motorcycle, and then purposefully just leaves his helmet behind.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is a profoundly unsettling image to open a television season with.
It really is.
You're watching a man who, professionally defies death every single day, suddenly just daring the universe to kill him.
Yeah, and that striking, deeply ironic image is exactly where we're going to begin today's deep dive. We want to welcome you to the discussion today. We are pulling from a single, just incredibly thorough source today. It's a comprehensive review of Season 2 of the hit television show, The Pitt.
Which is just a massive phenomenon right now.
Oh, totally. And the mission for you today for this deep dive isn't just to, recap a TV show. We want to give you those quick but thorough aha moments without the fluff. We are looking at how a piece of media manages to completely reinvent a really tired, soapy genre.
Right, the classic medical drama.
Exactly. And how it executes this nearly impossible pivot from a massive action-heavy spectacle in its first season to this deep claustrophobic psychological realism in its second without, losing its audience.
It's a really delicate balancing act.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand the stakes of Season 2, we really need to look at where we are in the timeline of the show itself.
Yeah, the setting is crucial here.
So the show picks up 10 months after a literal mass casualty event that nearly destroyed the Pittsburgh Trauma Medical Center, or the PTMC. And it's July 4th, Independence Day.
And, setting the premiere on the 4th of July is it's a brilliant mechanical choice by the writers.
Oh, for sure, because of the contrast.
Exactly. Outside the hospital walls, it's this day of national celebration, right?
Yeah.
Fireworks, barbecues, families. But inside any urban emergency room, it is notorious for being one of the absolute chaotic, bloodiest shifts of the entire year.
Because everyone's just out doing crazy stuff.
Yeah, you have alcohol, you have explosives, heat, huge crowd. It's basically a pressure cooker.
Yeah.
And stepping into that pressure cooker on this specific day, well, it forces every single character to confront the demons they've been, trying to outrun for the last 10 months.
Right. But before we dig into the sheer psychological weight of this new season, I feel like we have to establish why The Pitt was such a groundbreaking piece of television when it first premiered.
Oh, absolutely. The context is everything.
Because the reviewer does a really great job of highlighting the show's DNA. It was created by absolute heavyweights from the golden age of medical television. I mean, we're talking ER alumni, R. Scott Gemmell, producer John Wells, and lead actor Noem Uwaili.
Yeah, the royalty of the genre, basically.
Right. But they didn't just reboot ER. The review points out that they actively rebelled against the exact formula that made them famous in the first place.
Which is so interesting, because if you look at the landscape of hospital hits over the last, say, 20 years, shows like Grey's Anatomy, or even the later seasons of ER, they settled into a very specific, very comfortable rhythm.
Yeah, totally.
They became really sentimental. The review actually accurately describes them as saccharine and soapy.
Yes, that word stood out to me too. Soapy.
Right. They utilized the hospital setting, but the actual systemic challenges of medicine usually took a backseat to, well, the doctor's romantic entanglements.
I always called them soap operas with stethoscopes.
Huh. That is exactly what they were.
You literally tuned in to see who was hooking up in the supply closet. Sure. And the fact that a patient was actively coding in Trauma Bay 3 was just background noise to heighten the romance.
Yeah, it was just set dressing.
But then The Pitt dropped its first season, and the review describes it as a 1,000-volt shock to the entire medical drama genre. It operated way less like a melodrama and much more like a sociological documentary that just happened to be set in an ER.
Mm-hmm. It really dug deep.
It tackled racism, incel culture, and America's gun violence epidemic with a lens that the reviewer explicitly calls The Wire-esque.
And, that comparison to The Wire is the key to understanding the whole architecture of the show.
How so?
Well, The Wire wasn't just about cops and drug dealers, right? It was fundamentally about the systemic failure of institutions in Baltimore. And The Pitt takes that exact same institutional critique and applies it to the American healthcare system.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It's not just showing bad things happening to good patients. It's showing a fundamentally broken nation straining at the seams. And the emergency room is simply the catch basin for all of society's unaddressed failures.
And the structure of that first season was just relentless. I mean, it was 15 episodes that unfolded in real time.
One continuous shift.
Yes, one continuous, agonizing 15-hour shift centered around that Pittsfest mass shooting.
And that real-time format is a massive narrative risk, because it denies the audience any relief whatsoever.
You literally can't look away.
Right. There are no time jumps to let you catch your breath. The exhaustion the characters feel is transferred directly to the viewer. And that systemic, exhausting realism is exactly what audiences in 2026 are responding to.
Why do you think that is, though? Why do we want that?
Well, the review points out that viewers are just tired of glossy, sugar-coated escapism. They are craving what the writer calls the 50cc of realism that the Pitt delivers over traditional romantic melodrama.
Right. They want to see the real world reflected back at them.
Exactly. They want art that validates the complex, often really dark reality of the world they actually live in, rather than pretending those systemic issues can just be wrapped up neatly in a 45-minute procedural format.
Which naturally sets up a massive creative danger for season 2, because the review calls it the spectacle trap.
Oh, the spectacle trap is so real.
If season 1 anchored its entire critically acclaimed narrative on a massive, horrific disaster, like a mass shooting at a music festival, how do you follow that up?
You really can't, logically.
Right. If every season revolves around a near-huge catastrophe, the realism they fought so incredibly hard to build is just going to evaporate.
It's the classic escalation problem in serialized storytelling. If you start your narrative at a level 10, the studio executive instinct is always to push for an 11 next season.
And then a 12 the season after that.
Exactly. But human empathy just doesn't scale that way. Eventually, the audience stops caring about the people, and they just tune in for the explosions.
Yeah, and the review actually makes a pretty funny point about this exact trap. It jokes about how long it would be before we see Dr. Whitaker, played by Jaron Howell, treating victims of a freak hurricane in Pennsylvania.
Right, which doesn't even make sense.
Exactly. Or how long until Fiona Dourif's character, Dr. McKay, is somehow battling a swarm of angry rhinos that escaped from the Pittsburgh Zoo.
Right.
It just really highlights how absurd these shows can get when they desperately try to jump the shark and top themselves.
Well, and writers often fall into that trap because they mistake the inciting incident for the actual story.
Oh, say more about that.
They think the audience tuned in for the mass shooting, but the audience actually tuned in for the shockwave. They tuned in to see how the mass shooting fractured the people trying to clean it up.
Okay, wait, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
If the writers strip away the massive disaster, aren't they just retreating back to the exact daily routine medical drama they were trying so hard to avoid in the first place? Like, if there's no massive external hook, where is the narrative tension supposed to come from without the show just becoming, boring?
Well, what's fascinating here is how the showrunners substitute exterior explosions for interior tension.
Interior tension.
Yeah, the overall pressure of the show doesn't drop at all. It just migrates. In season 1, the threat was literally coming through the ambulance bay doors in the form of endless gunshot victims.
Right.
But in season 2, the show smartly acknowledges that not every shift involves a massive tragedy. So it relies on a string of smaller localized emergencies zipping out of the ambulance bay, which leaves just enough negative space in the narrative for the characters' internal threats to take over. The tension isn't about whether the hospital will run out of blood anymore. It's about whether the doctor's own psychological dams are going to burst.
So they trade the macro for the micro. And because the hospital isn't dealing with a single, overwhelming crisis, there's finally some quiet time.
Which is the worst thing for them.
Exactly. The review makes a brilliant observation about this. In a trauma center, quiet time is actually dangerous. Because when the adrenaline finally stops pumping, these characters are forced to just sit in silence with their accumulated trauma. And the review notes that the show's scalpel is remarkably sharp when carving its characters open with this fascinating nuance.
Because the quiet forces their compartmentalization to collapse.
What do you mean by that exactly?
Well, in high-stakes medicine, professionals have to build these massive psychological walls just to survive the job. You have to convince yourself that the horrors you see, the violence, the random accidents, the sheer unfairness of it all, that it's happening to, quote-unquote, patients, not to people.
Right, you just treat the physical injury.
Exactly. You treat the meat, you fix the plumbing, and you go home. But when that burnout reaches a critical mass, those walls just completely crumble.
Which brings us right back to that opening visual of Dr. Робби, played by Ноем Уайли, riding his motorcycle without a helmet. Here's where it gets really interesting to me.
Yeah.
We establish the deep irony of a chief trauma physician risking a head injury. The guy literally pieces together shattered bodies for a living, knowingly engaging in the very behavior that brings people into his ER. But based on what you're saying about compartmentalization, this isn't just a guy being reckless for an adrenaline rush.
No, not at all. It's a symptom of a profound, unresolved psychological burden.
Yeah.
He is carrying the ghost of every single life he couldn't save during that 15-hour shift 10 months ago. He is completely numb. And riding without a helmet is his way of actively daring the universe to make him feel something, even if that feeling is just hitting the pavement.
Wow.
It's a self-destructive manifestation of survivor's guilt. He survived the mass casualty event, but a part of him feels like he doesn't deserve to be safe when so many others weren't.
That is incredibly heavy. And he is far from the only one spiraling this season. The review dives into the return of his protege, Dr. Langdon, played by Patrick Ball.
Oh, that storyline is intense.
Yeah, so if you remember season 1, Langdon was unceremoniously pulled off the floor and sent to rehab because it came to light he was stealing drugs from his own patients.
Right.
Now in season 2, he is fresh out of rehab. He is walking right back into the very environment that fueled his addiction in the first place, and he's desperately struggling to earn Robbie's forgiveness.
The mechanics of that dynamic are just incredibly tense. Think about the currency of an emergency room, right?
Mm-hmm.
The currency isn't money. It's absolute implicit trust. When a doctor calls for 50 milligrams of a narcotic during a code, they need to know that the person handing them that syringe hasn't skimmed 20 milligrams off the top.
Oh, man. Because a slight misjudgment, a hidden tremor in the hands, and a patient literally dies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Langdon is walking back into a literal pharmacy, carrying this immense stigma of broken trust. He's trying to practice medicine while every single nurse and attending physician is secretly watching his every move.
The pressure of that surveillance alone would be enough to make someone crack, let alone an addict in early recovery.
Right.
And then you have charge nurse Dana, played by Catherine Lanasa, navigating all of this. Because the charge nurse is essentially the air traffic controller of the emergency room.
That's a great way to put it.
She is tracking bed space, triage priorities, incoming ambulances. But now she also has to manage the volatile psychological states of her own staff.
Yeah.
If the doctors are spiraling, she's the one trying to keep the planes from crashing into each other on the runway.
She essentially becomes the emotional shock absorber for the entire department.
Exactly.
And what makes this season so compelling is that while the focus is intensely inward on these frayed psyches, the show doesn't trap the characters in a vacuum. The outside world doesn't just politely wait for them to process their trauma.
No, of course not. The chaotic reality of modern America still manages to violently pierce the bubble of the PTMC.
Yeah.
The review details a couple of major spikes in exterior drama that disrupt this internal focus. And one of the most terrifying examples is a cyber attack that takes the entire hospital completely offline.
And a cyber attack in a modern medical facility isn't just like an IT problem. It is an immediate, catastrophic threat to life.
Let's really think about the mechanics of that for a second, because we rely on digital infrastructure for absolutely everything now.
Literally everything.
Imagine the sheer claustrophobia of being in a trauma center, dealing with a patient actively hemorrhaging, and suddenly every single monitor just goes black.
Terrifying.
The electronic health records are locked. You don't know a patient's blood type. You don't know if they have a lethal allergy to penicillin. The automated medicine dispensers, those Pete-sized machines, they won't even open because the network is down.
Yeah, you're locked out of the tools you need to save a life.
You are instantly thrown back into 19th century medicine while trying to manage 21st century trauma. You're flying completely blind.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, plot points like a ransomware attack aren't just clever ways to generate suspense for a TV show. They are reflections of our real-world systemic vulnerabilities.
Right.
The show is highlighting how incredibly fragile the hidden infrastructure of our society actually is. We are always just one severed fiber optic cable away from the dark ages, and the show forces its already exhausted characters to navigate that collapse in real time.
And that fragility brings us to the other major external event that the review focuses on, In one of the episodes, the violence of America's current immigration crackdown spills directly into the corridors of the hospital in violent force.
Yeah, and it's interesting how the reviewer frames this specific narrative choice.
Definitely. And just as a quick note for you listening, we're simply relaying how the review interprets this. We're not taking any political stance on immigration policy or ICE here, just conveying the source material.
Absolutely. We're just reporting the analysis from the article. And the reviewer draws a direct, explicit parallel between the show's depiction of immigration enforcement clashing with medical spaces and real-world events to explain the show's impact on a 2026 audience.
Right. The review details the case of Alex Breddy. He was a 37-year-old American intensive care nurse, and earlier this year, he was shot and killed in Minneapolis by ICE officers during a protest. And the reviewer's point is that the show's scenes carry this incredibly heavy, poignant weight because they are pulling directly from these very fresh, real-world wounds.
And again, just reflecting the review's analysis here, the parallel serves to reinforce the central underlying theme of the entire series, which is the illusion of sanctuary.
The illusion of sanctuary, I like that.
Right, because historically, hospitals were viewed as neutral ground. You leave the politics and the violence at the sliding glass doors of the ambulance bay, and once you're inside, everyone is just a patient.
Right, medicine is supposed to be impartial.
Exactly. But the show is arguing that in modern America, that boundary just no longer exists. The socio-political turmoil happening on the streets inevitably invades the trauma bay.
The characters basically cannot escape the brokenness of the nation they are actively trying to heal.
Right.
Whether it's a failing digital grid or armed federal agents in the waiting room, the system is actively working against the very people trying to save lives. It's a mirror reflecting the bone-deep exhaustion of essential workers who are perpetually caught in the crossfire of these systemic failures.
Which brings us to the ultimate verdict of the review. The writer concludes that by abandoning the massive, continuous spectacle of Season 1 and burrowing deep into these systemic and psychological fractures, the pit actually goes from strength to strength.
Yeah, they say, quote, its vitals have never been stronger.
It's a great line.
They successfully pulled off the pivot. They prove that you don't need a music festival shooting or, an escaped rhino to make utterly compelling television.
Thank goodness for that.
Right. You don't need it as long as your characters are complex enough to carry the immense weight of everyday tragedy.
It's basically a masterclass in trusting your audience. They trusted that viewers would be just as captivated by a doctor silently battling a crisis of faith in a break room as they would be by a massive 5-car pileup.
So what does this all mean for us? Why dedicate an entire deep dive to the narrative architecture of a medical drama?
It's a fair question.
I think what makes this review so compelling isn't just what it says about television, but what it says about how we process our own reality. If you really want to understand how storytelling can reflect our societal strain without losing its humanity, this show is the blueprint.
Absolutely.
We are all dealing with a world that feels increasingly unstable, whether it's failing infrastructure, political tension, or just the lingering effects of global events. We are all navigating our own micro-traumas. And the pit acts as a lens into how we process collective stress in our own daily quote-unquote shifts, whatever those shifts might look like in our own lives. It looks at the exhaustion we all feel and says, yes, this is real and it is heavy.
And this raises an important question, something really worth thinking about long after this deep dive ends.
What's that?
Well, if a television show can act as such a precise, unflinching mirror for a nation's systemic fractures, if it can capture the personal psychological burnout of an era so perfectly, at what point does it stop being mere entertainment? At what point does a piece of fiction cross over into becoming a historical document of our era's collective trauma?
Wow.
Decades from now, people might not look at news broadcasts to understand what it actually felt like to live in 2026. They might look at shows exactly like this one.
That is a brilliant way to look at it because, just going back to where we started with that trauma surgeon, right?
Yeah, the guy on the bike.
Human nature just wants the clean X-ray. We want the easy diagnosis where we can point to a stark white line on a black background and say, there's the problem, put a cast on it, it will heal in 6 weeks.
But life isn't like that.
No, life, especially right now, isn't a clean X-ray. It's murky, it's complicated. And maybe the most vital art is the kind that doesn't try to neatly fix the broken bone in 45 minutes, but just has the courage to sit with us in the messy, painful reality of the muddy waters.
Well said.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.